The bustling halls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago never seemed to slow down, especially during the night shift. Sarah Williams, a 32-year-old nurse practitioner with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, had gotten used to the constant movement and endless stream of patients over her 8 years at the hospital. On this particular Wednesday night in March, Sarah was doing her regular rounds when she heard the soft whirring of an electric wheelchair approaching. Looking up from her charts, she saw a young Asian man making his way toward the nurse's station. Even from a distance, she could tell something was different about this patient. Despite being in a wheelchair, he carried himself with quiet confidence, and his friendly eyes caught her attention immediately. "Excuse me," he said with a surprisingly deep voice. "I'm here for my scheduled treatment. The name is Marcus Chen." Sarah checked the computer and found his appointment. "Yes, Mr. Chen, we've been expecting you. Please follow me." As she led him to the treatment room, she couldn't help but notice how easily he maneuvered his wheelchair, as if it were simply an extension of himself. During the initial assessment, Sarah learned that Marcus was a software developer who worked from home. He had been in a car accident as a teenager that left him unable to walk, but that hadn't stopped him from graduating top of his class from college or building a successful career in technology. "You must be really good with computers," Sarah said while checking his vital signs. Marcus laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. "I'm okay, I guess, though my mom would say I spend too much time staring at screens." As Sarah prepared his treatment, they fell into easy conversation. She discovered that Marcus had recently moved to Chicago for work, leaving his family behind in California. He spoke about his love for chess, science fiction books, and trying new restaurants around the city. "It's not always easy finding accessible places," he admitted. "That makes it more exciting when I do." Sarah found herself sharing stories about her own life too, growing up on the south side of Chicago with her 3 sisters, about her mother who had pushed her to become a nurse, and about her dream of eventually opening a community health clinic. What started as a routine treatment session turned into 2 hours of genuine connection. Sarah was surprised by how comfortable she felt talking to Marcus. He listened intently when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and made her laugh with his clever observations about hospital life. As she helped him prepare to leave, Marcus hesitated for a moment. "Sarah," he said, looking slightly nervous for the first time that night, "I know this might be unprofessional, but would you like to get coffee sometime? There's this great accessible cafe near here that makes amazing pastries." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Dating patients was generally frowned upon, and she had never considered it before. But something about Marcus felt different. He wasn't just another patient. He was someone who had captured her interest in a way no one had in a long time. "I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising even herself. "But maybe we should wait until after your treatment course is finished." Marcus's face lit up with a bright smile. "That's fair, I can be patient." Over the next few weeks, Sarah saw Marcus regularly for his treatments. Each visit brought new conversations and discoveries about each other. She learned about his passion for developing accessible technology, and he heard about her volunteer work at local community centers. The other nurses noticed their growing connection. Some raised their eyebrows, and others whispered when they thought Sarah couldn't hear. "Are you sure about this?" her best friend and fellow nurse, Lisa, asked one night. "He seems nice, but dating someone with a disability, it won't be easy." Sarah just shook her head at their concerns. "When is love ever easy?" she replied, surprising herself with how defensive she felt. "Besides, I'm not dating him yet. We're just talking." But deep down, Sarah knew she was already falling for Marcus. His disability didn't matter to her. What mattered was his kind heart, his brilliant mind, and the way he made her feel whenever they talked. As his final treatment approached, she found herself looking forward to that promised coffee date, unaware that this was just the beginning of a love story that would change both their lives forever. After Marcus finished his treatment course, he wasted no time asking Sarah out for that promised coffee date. They met at the accessible cafe he had mentioned, a cozy spot called the Bean Corner, just 3 blocks from the hospital. Sarah arrived first, wearing a yellow sundress that made her dark skin glow in the morning light. When Marcus wheeled in, he looked different from his hospital visits. Instead of medical gowns, he wore a crisp blue shirt and dark jeans. His face lit up when he saw Sarah, and she felt her heart flutter at his warm smile. They ordered coffee and shared a large blueberry muffin, talking for hours until the afternoon crowd started filling the cafe. My mother always told me good things come to those who wait, Marcus said, taking a sip of his third coffee. Those weeks of treatment were worth it just to sit here with you today. But not everyone shared their joy. The following Sunday, when Sarah told her family about Marcus during their weekly dinner, the reactions weren't what she had hoped for. Her mother, Gloria, dropped her fork with a clatter. "A disabled man?" Gloria exclaimed, shaking her head. "Sarah, baby, you're making life harder than it needs to be. First, he's not black, and now this? What about children? What about your future?" Sarah's younger sisters exchanged worried looks across the dinner table. Even her father, usually quiet about her dating life, spoke up. "Sweetheart, are you sure about this? Taking care of someone for life is a big responsibility." "I'm not taking care of him," Sarah replied firmly, feeling her temper rise. "Marcus takes care of himself. He has a successful career, his own apartment, and he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. His wheelchair doesn't define who he is." Despite her family's concerns, Sarah continued seeing Marcus. Their coffee dates turned into dinner dates, movie nights, and weekend adventures. Marcus showed her how he navigated the city, teaching her about accessibility in ways she'd never considered before, even as a healthcare worker. One evening, while they were watching the sunset from Navy Pier, a group of children ran past, pointing and whispering about Marcus's wheelchair. Sarah felt angry, but before she could say anything, Marcus called the kids over. "Want to see something cool?" he asked them with a grin. He showed them how his electric wheelchair could spin in place, making them laugh. Then he explained how the chair helped him move around, just like their legs helped them. The children left with smiles and waves, their curiosity turned into understanding. "That was amazing," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "You turned their fear into learning." Marcus shrugged. "People fear what they don't understand. Sometimes all it takes is a friendly explanation." As weeks turned into months, Sarah discovered more layers to Marcus. He was patient with strangers' stares but fierce about his independence. He could code complex programs for hours but also enjoyed simple pleasures like feeding pigeons in the park. His disability was just one part of him, like her being black was just one part of her. At work, Sarah's colleagues slowly changed their minds about her relationship. They saw how Marcus would surprise her with lunch deliveries, sending her favorite dishes from local restaurants. They noticed how she smiled more, laughed more, seemed more confident in herself. But there were still challenges. One rainy evening, they tried going to a new restaurant, only to find it had stairs but no ramp. The manager apologized awkwardly, but Sarah could see the hurt in Marcus's eyes. Later that night, instead of letting it ruin their evening, they ordered takeout and had a picnic on Marcus's living room floor. "You know," Marcus said, as they shared spring rolls and noodles, "most women would have given up by now. The stares, the whispers, the inconveniences." Sarah looked at him seriously. "I'm not most women, and you're not just some guy in a wheelchair. You're Marcus Chen, the man who makes my heart race when you smile, who challenges me to think differently, who shows me new ways to see the world." That night, as Sarah drove home, she realized something important. She wasn't just dating Marcus anymore. She was falling in love with him. The thought scared and excited her at the same time. What scared her even more was how much she didn't care about the obstacles ahead. For the first time in her life, Sarah Williams was ready to fight for love, no matter what anyone else thought. 6 months into their relationship, Marcus started acting strange. He seemed nervous, checking his phone more often and having whispered conversations when he thought Sarah wasn't listening. Sarah tried not to worry, but she couldn't help wondering if something was wrong. One Saturday morning, Marcus called Sarah and asked her to meet him at the Bean Corner, the cafe where they had their first date. When she arrived, she found the usually busy cafe empty except for Marcus, who sat in his wheelchair next to a table decorated with flowers and candles. "What's all this?" Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. Marcus wheeled closer to her, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. His hand shook slightly as he opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. "Sarah Williams," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you saw me for who I am, not what I can't do. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." The cafe staff, who had been hiding in the kitchen, burst out clapping and cheering. But their happiness was quickly tested. When Sarah called her mother to share the news, Gloria's reaction was immediate and harsh. "Have you lost your mind?" she shouted through the phone. "Marriage? To a disabled Chinese man? What will people say?" "I don't care what people say, Mama," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "I love him." The next Sunday dinner at the Williams house was tense. Sarah's sisters tried to be supportive, but their smiles seemed forced. Her father sat quietly, pushing food around his plate. Only her youngest sister, Tanya, seemed genuinely happy for her. "Can he even have children?" Gloria asked bluntly during dinner. "Mama!" Tanya exclaimed, shocked. "It's a fair question," Gloria insisted. "Sarah needs to think about these things." Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Marcus and I have discussed everything we need to discuss. Our future is our business, not anyone else's." Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own family drama. His parents, who lived in California, were surprisingly quiet about the engagement. They sent a short congratulatory email but didn't call. When Sarah asked about it, Marcus changed the subject quickly. "Don't your parents want to meet my family?" Sarah asked one evening. "They're very busy," Marcus replied, not meeting her eyes. "Maybe after the wedding." Despite the family tensions, Sarah and Marcus started planning their wedding. They chose a small venue that was wheelchair accessible and began making their guest list. Sarah noticed that Marcus only included his parents from his side, no aunts, uncles, or cousins. "Don't you want to invite more of your family?" she asked. "They're all spread out across the world," Marcus said vaguely. "It would be hard for them to come." As the wedding day approached, Sarah's mother finally began to soften. It happened after she saw Marcus and Sarah together at a local street festival. She watched as they navigated the crowds together, saw how Marcus made her daughter laugh, and noticed how they worked as a team without any awkwardness about his wheelchair. "Maybe," Gloria admitted to Sarah later, "I was wrong about him, but I'm still worried about your future." "Mama," Sarah said gently, "the only thing you need to worry about is what you're wearing to the wedding." The day before their wedding, Marcus seemed unusually anxious. Sarah found him staring at his phone, frowning at a message. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Just some family stuff," he said, quickly putting his phone away. "Nothing important." Sarah wanted to ask more questions, but she was too excited about their wedding to worry. She didn't know that Marcus was keeping a huge secret, one that would change everything. As she fell asleep that night, dreaming of their future together, she had no idea that their simple wedding would lead to the biggest surprise of her life. The next morning, as Sarah put on her wedding dress with help from her sisters, she felt nothing but joy. Yes, some family members still had doubts. Yes, there were still questions about Marcus's distant family. But Sarah knew in her heart that she was making the right choice. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of an amazing story, and that Marcus Chen was much more than he appeared to be. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny and mild. The chosen venue, a modern event space in downtown Chicago, buzzed with activity. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by her sisters who helped with her dress, a beautiful, simple white gown that flowed elegantly to the floor. "You look like an angel," Tanya said, adjusting Sarah's veil. Their mother Gloria sat in the corner, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Despite her earlier doubts, seeing her daughter as a bride had melted her heart. Meanwhile, in another room, Marcus prepared himself with help from his father, James Chen. Unlike his usual casual clothes, today he wore a sharp black tuxedo specially tailored to look perfect while he sat in his wheelchair. His mother Linda fussed over his bow tie, her hands trembling slightly. "Son," James said quietly, "are you sure you don't want to tell her before the ceremony?" Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, Dad, not yet. I want her to know she married me for me, not for—" He stopped as someone knocked on the door, announcing it was time. The ceremony space looked magical. White flowers decorated the aisle, which was wide enough for Marcus's wheelchair. Guests filled the seats, mostly Sarah's large extended family on one side, while Marcus's side looked strangely empty with just his parents and a few close friends. As the music started playing, Sarah began her walk down the aisle with her father. When she saw Marcus waiting at the altar, his eyes filled with tears of joy, she felt her heart might burst. She noticed his hands gripping his wheelchair's armrests tightly, a sign she had learned meant he was deeply emotional. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. They had chosen a judge who knew how to naturally include Marcus's wheelchair in the proceedings, never making it feel awkward or different. When they exchanged rings, Sarah had to bend down slightly, but they had practiced this moment, making it look graceful and natural. I, Marcus Chen, take you, Sarah Williams, to be my wife, he said, his voice strong and clear. Your love makes me stronger than any wheelchair could make me weak. Sarah's vows made everyone cry. I, Sarah Williams, take you, Marcus Chen, to be my husband. You've taught me that true love has no barriers, no limitations, and no boundaries. After the judge pronounced them husband and wife, their first kiss as a married couple brought cheers from all the guests. Even Gloria was smiling broadly now, all her previous concerns forgotten in the joy of the moment. The reception that followed was lively and fun. Marcus surprised everyone by leading Sarah in a dance. He had practiced for weeks using his wheelchair in a specially choreographed routine. They moved together perfectly, Sarah's dress swirling around them as Marcus spun them across the dance floor. But there were odd moments too. Sarah noticed Marcus's parents having intense whispered conversations on their phones throughout the evening. Several times, they looked worried and quickly hung up when anyone approached them. And during the reception, multiple deliveries arrived, elaborate flower arrangements with cards that Marcus's parents quickly collected before anyone could see them. Is everything okay? Sarah asked her new husband during a quiet moment. Everything's perfect, Marcus replied, kissing her hand. But she saw him glance nervously at his phone for the 10th time that hour. As the evening wound down, Sarah's family surrounded them with love and congratulations. Even her most doubtful relatives had been won over by the obvious happiness of the couple. Gloria hugged Marcus tightly, whispering, "Welcome to the family, son." But just before they left for their hotel, Sarah overheard a strange conversation between Marcus and his father. "The family is insisting," James began. "Not now, Dad." Marcus cut him off sharply. "We'll deal with it after the honeymoon." Sarah pretended not to hear, but she couldn't help wondering what family they were talking about. Hadn't Marcus said he had no close relatives besides his parents? As they left the venue amid a shower of rose petals, Sarah pushed away her questions. She was now Mrs. Sarah Chen, married to the man she loved. Whatever secrets Marcus's family might have could wait. But little did she know, their simple honeymoon plans would soon be completely changed by a phone call that would reveal the truth about the Chen family. Sarah and Marcus were supposed to spend their honeymoon at a lovely beach resort in Hawaii. They had chosen it carefully, making sure everything was accessible for Marcus's wheelchair. Sarah had been looking forward to 7 days of sun, sand, and romance with her new husband. But on the morning they were supposed to leave, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. Sarah was in the bathroom packing her toiletries when she heard Marcus speaking in rapid Chinese. His voice sounded urgent and stressed. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked when she came out. Marcus sat in his wheelchair by the window, looking troubled. "There's been a change of plans," he said slowly. "My grandfather in San Francisco is very sick. The family is gathering for an emergency reunion. We need to go there instead of Hawaii." Sarah was surprised. "I thought you didn't have much family besides your parents." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. "It's complicated, but this is very important. I'm sorry about Hawaii. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Within hours, they found themselves on a flight to San Francisco instead of Hawaii. Sarah noticed something odd right away. They were flying first class, even though they had booked economy tickets to Hawaii. When she asked about it, Marcus mumbled something about a free upgrade. The surprises continued when they landed. A sleek black limousine waited for them at the airport, with a driver holding a sign that read Mr. and Mrs. Chen. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, but Marcus wheeled forward confidently. "No mistake," he said quietly. "This is for us." The driver expertly helped Marcus into the car and stored his wheelchair in the trunk. As they drove through San Francisco, Sarah noticed they were heading toward the most expensive part of the city. The car finally stopped in front of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "What's going on? How can we afford this?" Before Marcus could answer, an elegant older Asian woman in expensive clothes rushed out of the hotel. "Marcus." Finally, she stopped short when she saw Sarah, her eyes widening. "Grandmother," Marcus said formally, "This is my wife, Sarah." The woman recovered quickly, giving Sarah a slight bow. "Welcome to the family, dear. We have much to discuss." She turned to Marcus, speaking rapidly in Chinese. Sarah couldn't understand the words. She could hear the urgency in her voice. Inside the hotel, Sarah's confusion grew. The staff treated them like royalty, bowing and calling them Mr. and Mrs. Chen with great respect. They were led to a massive suite that looked bigger than their entire apartment back in Chicago. "Marcus," Sarah said firmly, closing the suite's door, "you need to tell me what's happening. Now." Marcus wheeled to the window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. "You're right," he said finally. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Just then, there was a knock at the door. A hotel staff member entered with a rack of designer clothes, all in Sarah's size. "These are for Mrs. Chen," he said. "The family gathering begins in 2 hours." After the staff member left, Sarah picked up one of the dresses. The price tag made her gasp. It cost more than she made in 2 months as a nurse. "My family," Marcus began slowly, "isn't exactly what I led you to believe." Before he could continue, his phone buzzed again. Looking at the screen, he sighed. "The family is gathering downstairs. We need to get ready." "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, feeling overwhelmed. "For you to meet the Chen family," Marcus replied. "All of them, and Sarah, there's something you need to know before we go down there." But another knock at the door interrupted them. This time it was Marcus's father, looking anxious. "Everyone's waiting," he said. "The press is outside too. We need to move quickly." "The press," Sarah repeated weakly. Marcus reached for her hand. "Sarah, I promise I'll explain everything. But right now, we need to get ready. Tonight, you're going to learn why my family insisted on this gathering." As Sarah stood there, holding a designer dress and staring at her husband, she realized their simple life in Chicago was about to change forever. The mysterious Chen family was clearly more than Marcus had revealed, and she was about to find out exactly how much more. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in their hotel suite, barely recognizing herself in the expensive red designer dress. Her hair had been styled by a professional who appeared mysteriously at their door, and she wore jewelry that had been borrowed from what she now realized must be the family collection. Marcus looked handsome in his new suit, specially tailored for his wheelchair. He kept glancing at his phone, which wouldn't stop buzzing with messages. "Before we go down," Marcus said, taking a deep breath, "I need to tell you something about the Chen family." But before he could continue, his mother Linda burst into the room. "No time for talk now. Everyone is waiting in the grand ballroom." Sarah's head spun. The grand ballroom? They followed Linda to the elevator, which took them to the hotel's largest event space. 2 men in black suits stood guard at the doors, earpieces in their ears. They bowed slightly as Marcus approached. "Security guards?" Sarah whispered to Marcus. "For a family reunion." The doors opened and Sarah's jaw dropped. The ballroom was filled with at least 300 people, all dressed in expensive clothes. Cameras flashed. Television crews stood in the corners. A giant banner read, "Welcome home, Marcus Chen." "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over speakers, "please welcome Marcus Chen and his new wife, Sarah Williams Chen." The crowd applauded. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She gripped the handle of Marcus's wheelchair tightly. An elderly man in a wheelchair, who looked like an older version of Marcus, rolled forward. Despite appearing sick, he carried himself with obvious authority. Everyone in the room bowed as he passed. "Grandson," he said in clear English, "you have kept us waiting." "Grandfather," Marcus replied respectfully, "this is Sarah, my wife." The old man looked at Sarah with sharp eyes. "So, this is the woman who married my grandson without knowing she was joining one of the richest families in Asia." Sarah felt the room spin. "What?" "Sarah," Marcus said quickly, taking her hand, "this is Chen Weiming, my grandfather. He founded Chen Technologies." Sarah's mind raced. Chen Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the world. She had seen their logo on computers, phones, and gadgets everywhere. "You mean?" she started. "Yes," Marcus's grandfather said. "My grandson is heir to the Chen fortune, currently valued at approximately $32 billion. The room went silent. Sarah stared at Marcus, who looked both guilty and worried. I wanted to tell you, he said softly. But every time I tried dating someone who knew about the family money, they only saw the fortune, not me. When I met you, and you treated me like a normal person, saw past my wheelchair, I couldn't risk losing that. Whispers spread through the crowd. Sarah could hear fragments. Nurse. Married in Chicago. Didn't know. Wheelchair. Love marriage. Marcus's grandfather held up his hand, and the room fell silent again. Sarah Chen, he said. When we heard Marcus had married without the family's knowledge, many were angry. But I wanted to meet the woman who married my grandson for love, not money. Sarah found her voice. Sir, I didn't know about any of this. I married Marcus because he's the kindest, smartest, most wonderful man I've ever met. The old man's stern face softened slightly. So I see, and that is worth more than any fortune. He turned to address the crowd. Tonight, we welcome Sarah to the Chen family. She has proven that true love still exists. Love that sees past disability, past cultural differences, and past wealth. The room erupted in applause. Servers appeared with champagne. Photographers took pictures. Family members began approaching to introduce themselves. Sarah's head was spinning. Just that morning, she had been a normal nurse married to what she thought was a regular software developer. Now she stood in a room full of billionaires, being welcomed into one of the wealthiest families in the world. Are you angry? Marcus asked quietly, squeezing her hand. Sarah looked down at her husband, seeing the same kind eyes that had first caught her attention in the hospital. I married you, Marcus Chen, she said. Rich or poor, that doesn't change. But as more relatives approached and cameras continued flashing, Sarah realized their simple life in Chicago was over. The real question was, what kind of life would they have now? The rest of the evening passed like a dream for Sarah. Every few minutes, another member of the Chen family would come to introduce themselves. There were cousins who ran major companies in Singapore, aunts who owned hotel chains in Hong Kong, and uncles who managed banks across Asia. And this, Marcus said, as an elegant woman approached, is my Aunt Mai. She's the one who helped design the special features on my wheelchair. Sarah looked at the wheelchair with new understanding. It wasn't just any medical equipment. It was custom-made with technology that probably cost more than her parents' house. My dear, Aunt Mai said, hugging Sarah warmly, we've been so curious about the woman who captured Marcus's heart. Most girls who tried to date him only saw dollar signs. That's why I never told them, Marcus added. The last girl I dated, before Sarah, looked up my family online after our first date. Suddenly, she was planning our wedding and talking about houses in Beverly Hills. Sarah remembered their simple dates at the Bean Corner Cafe, the picnics in the park, and movie nights at Marcus's modest apartment. You lived so normally in Chicago, she said. Your apartment, your job. Marcus smiled. The apartment building belongs to our family. And that software developer job. I actually run the accessibility division of Chen Technologies, working remotely to keep a low profile. Just then, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught everyone's attention. Sarah turned to see her family, her parents and all three sisters. Being escorted in by hotel staff, they looked shocked and overwhelmed. I sent a private jet to bring them, Marcus explained. They're part of our family now. They should be here. Gloria, Sarah's mother, walked toward them in a daze, wearing a new designer dress that someone had clearly rushed to her. Sarah, she said weakly, your husband. He's really rich, Mama. Sarah finished for her, laughing despite herself. I just found out too. Marcus's grandfather wheeled over to meet Sarah's family. To everyone's surprise, he bowed respectfully to Gloria and Sarah's father. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, he said, thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter. She has given my grandson something money cannot buy, true love. Gloria, who had once worried about her daughter marrying a disabled man of a different race, now stood speechless before one of the wealthiest men in Asia. Sarah's father, always quiet and reserved, found his voice first. Sir, he said, we only want our daughter's happiness. As to I want my grandson's happiness, the old man replied, and it seems they have found it together. The two families began to mingle, cultures and worlds colliding in the most unexpected way. Sarah watched as her youngest sister Tanya chatted excitedly with Marcus's cousins, while her other sisters were deep in conversation with Aunt Mai about fashion. Later in the evening, Marcus led Sarah to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "There's one more thing," he said nervously. "Grandfather wants us to have a traditional Chinese wedding ceremony next month, here in San Francisco, with about 1,000 guests." Sarah thought about their simple wedding in Chicago just days ago. 1,000 guests? Most of them business associates and family friends, Marcus explained. "But we don't have to if you don't want to." Sarah looked around the grand ballroom. She saw her family laughing with Marcus's relatives. Watched the easy way both families were coming together despite their differences. She saw Marcus's grandfather smiling proudly at them, and she remembered all the love and acceptance she had found in this room. 1,000 guests, she repeated, then smiled. "Well, I guess I better start learning some Chinese traditions." Marcus's face lit up. He pulled her down for a kiss, not caring about the photographers who immediately started snapping pictures. "I love you," he whispered. "Rich or poor, just like you said." Sarah touched his cheek gently. "I married a wonderful man who happened to be in a wheelchair. Finding out he's also a billionaire. That's just an interesting plot twist in our love story." As they looked out over the crowded ballroom, Sarah realized their life would never be the same. But one thing wouldn't change. The love that had brought them together in that Chicago hospital was still the foundation of everything. Money might change their circumstances, but it would never change their hearts. 1 month after the surprising family reunion, Sarah and Marcus held their traditional Chinese wedding ceremony in San Francisco. The event was even grander than Sarah had imagined. The ceremony took place in the largest botanical garden in the city, which the Chen family had rented entirely for the occasion. Sarah wore a stunning red and gold traditional Chinese wedding dress, while Marcus looked handsome in his matching traditional attire, his wheelchair decorated with red and gold ribbons. Over 1,000 guests attended, including business leaders, politicians, and even a few celebrities. "You look beautiful," Marcus whispered when he first saw her. "Just like the day I met you at the hospital." Sarah smiled, remembering their first meeting. "Who would have thought that night shift would change my life forever?" But the biggest surprise came during the wedding reception. Marcus's grandfather called everyone's attention by tapping his glass with a spoon. "Today," the old man announced, his voice strong despite his illness, "I want to share some news. Marcus and Sarah have made a decision that makes me very proud." Sarah and Marcus held hands as Marcus's grandfather continued. "They have decided to use part of their fortune to open a chain of accessible medical clinics across America," he announced. "These clinics will serve everyone, regardless of their ability to pay, and will specialize in care for people with disabilities." The crowd applauded. Sarah's mother Gloria wiped tears from her eyes as she heard how her daughter would fulfill her dream of helping others, but on a much larger scale than she had ever imagined. "The first clinic," Marcus added, "will open on Chicago's South Side, where Sarah grew up, and Sarah will be the head of the entire healthcare network." Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. They had spent weeks planning this project, combining her medical knowledge with his business experience. The clinics would not only provide healthcare, but would also train nurses and doctors to better understand and treat patients with disabilities. "But that's not all," Marcus continued. "We're also starting a foundation to develop new technologies for people with disabilities, because everyone deserves the chance to live their best life, regardless of their physical limitations." After the announcement, Sarah's father approached them. "I was wrong to doubt you too," he said quietly. "You're not just living your own dream, you're helping others live theirs too." Later that evening, as they watched their families dancing and celebrating together, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 year. She had gone from being a night shift nurse to becoming part of one of the wealthiest families in the world. But more importantly, she had found true love and a way to make a real difference in the world. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how some people thought I was crazy to marry a disabled man," she replied. "They couldn't see what I saw, your beautiful heart, your brilliant mind, your strength." "And now?" he asked with a smile. "Now they probably think I'm the smartest woman in Chicago," she laughed, "but they still don't understand. I didn't marry you for any of this." She gestured at the lavish celebration around them. "I married you because you're you." Marcus pulled her down for a kiss. "And that's exactly why you deserve all of it." As the evening wound down, Marcus's grandfather approached them one last time. He looked tired but happy. "You two have taught this old man something important," he said. "True love doesn't see disability, race, or wealth. It sees the heart." Sarah and Marcus watched as their guests began to leave, the two families now completely united. Black and Asian relatives hugged goodbye, exchanged phone numbers, and made plans to visit each other. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked Sarah. "Which home?" she teased. "Our apartment in Chicago, your family's mansion here, or that penthouse your parents bought us as a wedding gift." "Home is wherever we're together," he replied simply. Sarah bent down to kiss him, not caring about the few photographers still snapping pictures. Their story would probably be in tomorrow's papers, the nurse who married a billionaire in a wheelchair. But they knew the real story was much simpler and much more beautiful. Two people who found true love, overcame every obstacle, and were now working together to help others do the same. It was the perfect ending to their fairy tale, or rather, the perfect beginning of their new life together.